At the altar of a dimly lit church, chaos erupts in a moment of raw intensity. The pastor, mid-motion, stumbles backward, clutching his chest, his face frozen in shock and pain. Opposite him, a woman with a steely, determined glare holds a smoking handgun, her arm unwavering as she takes a step forward. The stained glass windows behind cast jagged, colorful reflections across the scene, amplifying the drama. Candles flicker wildly on the ornate altar, their light barely illuminating the charged atmosphere. The air is thick with tension, the echoes of the gunshot reverberating through the silent, sacred space. A pastor, a secret affair, and a fatal confrontation that left a community in shock. The story of this tragic event begins long before the moment of violence that shattered the sanctity of the church. In a close-knit community where faith was a cornerstone of daily life, one man's leadership and charisma inspired devotion. The pastor was a beacon of hope for his congregation, his words a source of comfort and guidance. His sermons drew crowds from neighboring towns, filling the pews with eager faces seeking solace and answers. But within the walls of this seemingly peaceful church, secrets festered, hidden from the watchful eyes of the congregation. Among the devoted followers was a woman whose presence became increasingly significant, a member of the church choir. Her voice often soared during Sunday services, a melody that touched the hearts of many. Yet, her connection to the pastor went far beyond the hymns and prayers shared during worship. Whispers began to circulate, quiet murmurs that hinted at a bond that defied the sacred vows the pastor had sworn to uphold. The woman, once seen as a faithful member of the church, now found herself at the center of speculation. Her interactions with the pastor grew more frequent, her role in the church more prominent. To outsiders, it might have appeared as a mentor-mentee relationship, an act of guidance from a spiritual leader to a struggling soul. But those closest to the situation noticed the subtle glances, the lingering touches, the moments that spoke volumes in their brevity. Tension mounted as the rumors persisted. The pastor, known for his eloquence, began to falter during his sermons. His once commanding presence seemed shadowed by an invisible weight, a burden he could not share. Members of the congregation exchanged concerned looks, questioning whether their beloved leader was battling personal demons. Yet, no one dared to confront him directly, their reverence for his position outweighing their suspicions. It was during this time that the woman's demeanor shifted. Once warm and approachable, she grew distant, her expressions often unreadable. The sense of unease surrounding her became impossible to ignore. Churchgoers began to piece together fragments of conversations, snippets of interactions that hinted at something deeper. The sense of foreboding grew stronger, an unspoken acknowledgment that something was amiss. The fateful day began like any other. The sun cast its golden light through the stained glass windows, illuminating the pews as the congregation gathered for the morning service. The pastor stood at the pulpit, his voice steady but lacking the fervor it once held. As he spoke, his eyes scanned the crowd, pausing briefly when they met hers. The connection was undeniable, a moment that passed unnoticed by many but not by all. What followed would forever change the lives of those present. The service had concluded, and the congregation began to disperse. The pastor remained behind, his steps slow as he approached the altar. The woman waited in the shadows, her expression unreadable, her presence unnoticed by those exiting the church. It was in this moment of solitude that the confrontation began, a conversation laced with tension and unspoken truths. The argument escalated, voices rising in a sacred space meant for peace. The words exchanged were sharp, cutting deeper than any blade. And then, in a heartbeat, the sound of a gunshot pierced the air. The pastor's body crumpled to the ground, the life fading from his eyes as he clutched his chest. The woman stood over him, her arm steady, her expression unflinching. The echoes of the gunshot lingered, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. The sacred space, once a haven of solace, now bore the weight of a violent act that would leave a community forever changed. The stained glass windows, once symbols of hope and faith, cast jagged reflections across the scene, their beauty marred by the darkness that had been revealed. What led to this devastating moment? What secrets had been hidden in plain sight, and how had they unraveled so tragically? These questions would haunt the congregation and the community, their search for answers uncovering truths that would challenge their perceptions of faith, loyalty, and trust. The story of the pastor and the woman who shattered his world is one of love, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of secrets kept too long. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. The pastor, Reverend Daniel Hayes, had long been the beacon of hope in the small, tight-knit town of Willow Creek. His booming voice echoed through the church every Sunday, calling his congregation to prayer, urging them to live righteous, godly lives. His smile was a constant, his warmth undeniable. Revered by everyone from the oldest churchgoer to the youngest child, Daniel was seen as a pillar of the community, an example of unwavering faith and moral integrity. The church was his sanctuary, and its parishioners his family. He was a man who could make anyone believe that redemption was always within reach, a man whose words carried the weight of the Bible itself. But beneath the surface of Daniel's pious persona, hidden behind his comforting sermons and saintly reputation, lay a secret, a dangerous one. He had been living a double life for months, one that none of his loyal followers could ever imagine. To the world, he was a devoted husband to Claire, the nurse who ran a well-respected clinic in California, and the father of 2 young children. But to Alexis Green, a member of the congregation with a complicated history of her own, he was something more. Alexis, with her fiery red hair and sharp, calculating eyes, had been part of the church for several years. On the outside, she was just another devoted member of the flock, always at the pastor's side, offering her support in whatever way he needed. But beneath her gentle exterior, there was something darker, something more ambitious. She had always been drawn to Daniel, not just for his position as the spiritual leader of the community, but for the power he wielded, the promise of control, of influence. It didn't take long for her to realize that a little flirtation, a little attention, could spark something more. Soon, their meetings, always under the guise of pastoral counseling or church business, became more frequent. And before long, what started as an innocent connection grew into something far more complicated. The people of Willow Creek had no idea. No one could have guessed that the man who held their hands during baptisms, led them in prayer, and performed weddings and funerals alike, could harbor such a secret. No one could have known that the pastor, whose very presence brought comfort, was wrapped in the embrace of another woman. But then the whispers began. First in hushed tones at the back of the church, then louder among the pews. A change in Daniel's demeanor had not gone unnoticed. He seemed distracted, tired, distant. Those who had always seen him as the rock of the community began to feel something was off. There was something in his eyes, something haunted, as if he were fighting a war within himself that no one could see. Alexis, ever the opportunist, knew this couldn't last forever. She pushed and prodded, trying to get Daniel to make the choice, leave everything behind and build a new life with her, or keep playing the part of the perfect husband and father. As much as Daniel resisted, as much as he fought against the pull of his conscience and the potential wreckage of his life, the pressure from Alexis grew. Their meetings became more heated, the stakes higher, until finally a plan began to take shape. A plan that would forever change the course of Daniel's life, and the lives of those around him. Meanwhile, Claire, his wife, was none the wiser. She was devoted to her work as a nurse, highly regarded in the medical community, and an unwavering supporter of her husband's ministry. She had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss in their marriage. But the signs were there, subtle ones. Late nights spent at the church, unexplained absences, the distant look in Daniel's eyes when he did return home. But she chalked it up to the stresses of ministry. It wasn't until the unthinkable happened that Claire was forced to face the truth of her husband's betrayal. The town of Willow Creek was a place where everyone knew everyone. It was a town where the grocery store clerk greeted you by name, where people gathered for picnics in the park and stayed late into the evening talking under the stars. It was a place where the news of someone's illness or the birth of a child spread like wildfire, where every death was mourned as a community loss. It was a town that placed a premium on family, faith, and tradition. And so, when tragedy struck, when the pastor's secret came to light, the shock rippled through Willow Creek like a wave crashing against the shore. The church that had once been a place of comfort and refuge became a symbol of betrayal and heartache. No one could have anticipated the events that would unfold. One morning, just as the sun began to rise over the horizon, a body was discovered. It was Alexis. Her lifeless form was found in the woods just outside of town, her clothes disheveled, a look of terror frozen on her face. The news spread quickly, and with it came an air of confusion. Who could have done this? What had happened to her? As the authorities began their investigation, it became clear that Alexis's death was no accident. This was no random crime. This was personal. The police turned their attention to Daniel. After all, who else could have had a motive? He was the one person who knew Alexis best, the one who had been tangled in a secret relationship with her. But as they dug deeper into the lives of those involved, they began to uncover layers of deception that no one could have predicted. The pastor, the devoted husband and father, was hiding more than just a mistress. His secrets were buried in the past, tied to a history of lies that had spiraled out of control. As the investigation unfolded, the town of Willow Creek was forced to confront the man they had held in such high esteem. Reverend Daniel Hayes was no longer the moral leader they had once trusted. The very foundation of the community began to crumble as the truth slowly emerged, one that would forever change Willow Creek and everyone in it. Daniel's life began to unravel in the most public of ways. The small town, which had once rallied around him in prayer and support, now looked at him with suspicion and fear. The Reverend, once seen as a shepherd of their faith, was now regarded as a man who had betrayed not only his wife and children but an entire community. Claire, devastated and broken, struggled to make sense of the man she had loved for so long. The once happy family, the one that had seemed so perfect from the outside, was now shattered. But the real tragedy, the one that would echo through the town for years to come, was the unanswered question: who killed Alexis Green? Did Daniel have something to do with it? Or was there another force at play, someone else in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? As the investigation deepened, new revelations came to light, and the truth seemed even more elusive. As the clock ticked on and the case remained unsolved, the people of Willow Creek were forced to reckon with the duality of the man they had once revered. The question remained: could they ever truly forgive the man who had destroyed their trust, their faith, and their sense of security? The reverberations of the pastor's secrets would linger in Willow Creek for years. What had seemed like a perfect community, a place where faith and morality reigned supreme, was forever tarnished by the truth that lay buried beneath the surface. Please, my beloved family, am pleading, I do hope you have subscribed already, as it is about to get really interesting. It was a crisp Wednesday afternoon in Willow Creek, and the church was bustling with activity. Reverend Daniel Hayes had called a special meeting, one that was meant to be about routine business, plans for the upcoming revival, updates on the children's ministry, and a few words of encouragement. But it was clear from the start that something was different. His usual warmth was absent, replaced by an unsettling tension. The congregation sat quietly, eyes fixed on their pastor, sensing that there was something more at play beneath the surface. In the back of the room, Alexis Green watched him intently. She had been at the church since morning, helping with preparations, offering her usual support. But today was different. She had been pushing Daniel for weeks, urging him to make a decision, to finally leave his wife and commit to her, to stop living this double life that was only hurting them both. She could see the struggle in his eyes, the guilt that weighed on him, but she was done being patient. Today, she planned to confront him, to force him to take action once and for all. As the meeting wound down, Daniel excused himself, claiming he needed a few minutes to speak privately with Alexis. The congregation, unaware of the storm brewing just outside their vision, left the room, chatting among themselves, their voices fading as they exited the building. Only a handful of key witnesses remained in the church, including Claire, who had come by the clinic on her break to attend the meeting. She lingered near the door, unaware that the drama unfolding just a few feet away would forever alter her life. In the church's small office, the confrontation between Daniel and Alexis began. Alexis stood by the desk, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp with determination. She had had enough of waiting, of being second place in Daniel's life. She was demanding answers now. The pastor, visibly shaken, ran his hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. "I've told you, Alexis," Daniel said, his voice strained. "This has to stop. We can't keep doing this. It's tearing me apart. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand just fine," Alexis snapped, stepping closer to him. "You think I don't know you're just afraid? Afraid of losing everything you've built here. Afraid of being exposed. But I can't keep hiding, Daniel. I won't. You promised me a life together. You promised me." "I never promised you anything." Daniel's voice rose in frustration. "I made a mistake. A huge one. But I can't." Before he could finish, Alexis interrupted him. "You can't do what? Leave her? Your perfect wife? Your perfect little life?" She stepped forward, closing the gap between them. "I'm done being second, Daniel. I'm done being your secret." His eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. He knew how this would end if he didn't stop it now. But Alexis was relentless. She pressed him, forcing him into a corner. Her words were sharp, like daggers, cutting through the fragile walls he had built around his conscience. And in that moment, as the tension in the room reached its peak, something inside Daniel snapped. There was a moment, a heartbeat of pure silence. The world seemed to stop. Alexis reached into her purse, pulling out a small, cold object. A gun. Daniel's eyes widened in shock, his voice caught in his throat. "You really thought you could just walk away from me, didn't you?" Alexis hissed, her voice low, dangerous. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Daniel whispered, backing away. He knew it was too late. Before he could move any further, before he could reach the door or call for help, Alexis raised the gun, her finger on the trigger. There was no warning, no time to react. The shot rang out, loud and jarring, echoing through the church. The bullet struck Daniel in the chest. His body jerked with the impact, and he staggered back, crashing into the wooden chair behind him. He gasped for breath, his hands clutching at his chest, his eyes wide with disbelief. Alexis stood over him, the gun still in her hand, the fire of determination still in her eyes. Outside, Claire had heard the shot. It was unmistakable, sharp, sudden. Her heart raced in her chest as she pushed through the door, rushing toward the source of the sound. She froze at the threshold, her eyes landing on her husband, lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood. "Daniel!" she screamed, rushing to his side, her voice breaking with horror. Alexis, still standing there, didn't move. Her lips curled into a twisted, cold smile as she watched Claire try to reach her husband. Inside the church, the sound of the shot had sent panic rippling through the few remaining people. Someone had called 911 before Claire even arrived, but the chaos that followed was nothing short of frantic. The once peaceful sanctuary of the church became a scene of terror and confusion. Claire cradled Daniel's head in her lap, her hands shaking as she tried to stop the bleeding. But there was nothing she could do. Life was draining from him, and the reality of what had just happened began to set in. Outside, the wail of sirens grew louder as police cars and ambulances rushed toward the church. Officers flooded the scene, their eyes scanning for answers. Witnesses, some still in shock, pointed toward the office where the confrontation had taken place. Inside the church, the calm serenity of a place once built on faith and trust was shattered. Reverend Daniel Hayes, once the pillar of the community, lay dying in front of the woman he had betrayed and the wife who had once trusted him. Alexis, the woman who had pulled the trigger, was standing motionless, as if waiting for the inevitable consequences to descend upon her. And the people of Willow Creek, who had once looked to their pastor for guidance, were left in the wake of a tragedy so unimaginable that even now, months later, they would still struggle to grasp the depth of what had occurred in the place they had always seen as sacred. The questions had only just begun. What led Alexis to such desperation? Why had Daniel's life ended in such violence? And who was truly responsible for what had happened? The answers would come, but not quickly enough to undo the damage that had been done. As the sirens wailed closer, the authorities sprang into action. By the time the first police cars screeched to a halt outside the church, the scene was already chaotic. Officers rushed to secure the perimeter, keeping back curious onlookers, some of whom were still in disbelief. The small town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew everyone, had never witnessed anything like this before. The quiet sanctuary that had always served as a place of refuge and prayer was now a crime scene, and the community was forced to confront the reality of what had happened within its walls. Detective Laura Martinez, the lead investigator, stepped out of her patrol car and immediately took control of the situation. Her eyes scanned the church as she walked toward the entrance, assessing the scene with a trained focus that came from years of experience. She had worked her way up through the ranks, handling everything from petty thefts to more serious crimes, but nothing had prepared her for the brutality of what lay before her. Inside the church, the officers were already beginning to take statements from witnesses. Claire, still shaking, was sitting in the corner, her tear-streaked face pale as she clutched her husband's blooded shirt, the life draining from his body. Alexis stood near the back, her expression unreadable as she was being questioned by an officer. The gun that had been used in the shooting was lying on the floor nearby, still in plain view, but the cold steel offered no answers, only questions. Detective Martinez approached Claire first, offering what little comfort she could in the midst of the horror. I know this is hard, but we need to understand what happened here," she said softly. Claire nodded, her voice shaky as she recounted what she had witnessed. I heard the shot. I didn't know what it was at first. I thought maybe it was a door slamming or something. But then I ran in, and he was on the floor. Alexis was standing there, holding the gun." Claire's words hung heavy in the air. She had not yet processed what her mind was screaming. The woman her husband had been involved with had just shot him in cold blood. She looked up at Martinez, her voice hoarse. She just shot him. Right there. Martinez nodded, making mental notes as she moved on to Alexis, who had been silent up until this point. Alexis's cold demeanor gave nothing away, though her tight grip on her purse betrayed the tension simmering beneath the surface. The officer questioned her with caution, but there was no denying that her proximity to the crime made her the key suspect. Alexis denied any intent to kill, claiming the shooting was an accident during a heated argument. But there was an undeniable chill in her voice, a lack of remorse that didn't align with her claims of self-defense. The detective turned her attention to the immediate physical evidence. The gun found on the scene matched the bullet wound in Daniel's chest. But the fact that the weapon was in plain view, not hidden or discarded, added a layer of complexity. Could Alexis have intended to kill him, or had something else transpired? Martinez's mind raced with possibilities. She ordered the gun to be carefully bagged as evidence, and then moved to speak with the other witnesses who had gathered outside the church. The police focused their efforts on collecting statements from those who had been present that day. Several had seen Alexis leave the building shortly before the shot was fired. Their descriptions aligned with Claire's account. Alexis had been in the office alone with Daniel. Others reported hearing Ray's voices from inside, but no one had been able to make out the words. A few saw Claire rushing after the gunshot, but only a handful of people had actually witnessed the event. Detective Martinez gathered all the information and began formulating a timeline. Something didn't sit right with her about Alexis's story. There were gaps in the narrative, things that didn't quite add up. If the shooting had truly been a spur-of-the-moment act, why was Alexis so composed in the aftermath? Why hadn't she tried to help Daniel or flee the scene? As the day stretched into evening, the investigation began to unfold in unexpected ways. The detectives turned their attention to the connections between Daniel and Alexis. Both had ties to the church. Alexis had been a regular attendee for years, while Daniel had been her spiritual guide, her confidant. But the nature of their relationship was murkier than initially realized. The phone records between the two revealed a history of late-night calls, texts, and even encrypted messages. Investigators discovered that they had been communicating regularly, far beyond the typical pastor-parishioner interactions. It seemed clear that something had been going on between them, though Daniel had never admitted to it publicly. Further digging into Alexis's personal life revealed another set of troubling details. She had recently made large, unexplained financial transactions, and there was a series of calls made to Daniel just hours before the shooting. They had planned to meet, but the conversations had quickly turned to threats, according to the phone logs. Alexis had been pressuring Daniel to leave his wife for good, and the argument had reached a boiling point that afternoon. As the investigation progressed, more layers of the story came to light. Witness testimonies painted a portrait of a man caught between two women, one of whom was becoming more desperate and violent as her demands grew. Alexis's motivations became clearer. She wanted control. She wanted Daniel, and she would stop at nothing to get him. But did she want him so badly that she would kill him? That was the burning question. Detective Martinez wasn't satisfied with the narrative that Alexis had spun. It didn't make sense for her to shoot Daniel in such a calculated manner, not when she had so much at stake. Alexis had been playing a dangerous game, trying to force Daniel's hand. But the question remained, did she truly intend to kill him, or had she made a grave mistake? Her calm reaction after the shooting raised more questions than answers. As the hours wore on and the investigation continued, the police had no answers yet, only suspicions. Alexis was arrested, but the motive remained unclear. The pieces were slowly coming together, but with so many unknowns still left to uncover, the detectives knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with more revelations. The once seemingly perfect life of Daniel Hayes, his family, his career, his faith, had unraveled in a single, violent moment. And the truth, like the darkness that surrounded the case, was just beginning to emerge. The affair between Reverend Daniel Hayes and Alexis Green had been an open secret among the tight-knit community of Willow Creek for months. To the outside world, Daniel was a pillar of morality, a man whose counsel and leadership had been sought by countless families. His sermons echoed through the small church, inspiring the faithful and guiding them with his teachings of forgiveness, grace, and redemption. But behind closed doors, he was a man hiding a much darker truth, a man who had fallen into the arms of a woman whose love he couldn't resist. It had started innocently enough. Alexis, a longtime member of the congregation, had often sought Daniel's guidance, confiding in him about her struggles with loneliness and her past relationships. As a single woman, she had found comfort in his spiritual wisdom, and their conversations grew more intimate over time. What began as friendly counsel however, soon turned into something more dangerous. Daniel had been a married man for over a decade, and Claire, his wife, had always stood by him, supporting his work with the church. But as Alexis and Daniel's interactions deepened, a line had been crossed. It wasn't just about spiritual advice anymore. Alexis began seeking out more personal time with him, often at odd hours, under the pretense of needing further guidance. Their meetings were always discreet, hidden behind the facade of religious duty. But in those private moments, their connection grew stronger, more intense. But the twist didn't end there. As Detective Martinez dug deeper into the couple's communications, she discovered a series of cryptic text messages exchanged between Alexis and an unknown person just hours before the murder. The messages were chilling in their ambiguity. "I'm done waiting. If he won't make a decision, I'll make it for him. Do you think she'll believe his lies forever? He's not going to get away with this." At first, the text seemed to point to Alexis's growing desperation. But as Martinez dug further, she found something that didn't fit. The phone number from which the text had been sent wasn't Alexis's. It was registered to an unknown burner phone. This new revelation led to a major breakthrough. Someone else had been involved in the situation, someone who had been orchestrating the events behind the scenes. The investigation took a dramatic turn when another piece of evidence came to light, a recording from a church security camera that had been installed just weeks before the shooting. The footage was grainy and unclear, but it revealed a shocking detail. On the night before the murder, a shadowy figure could be seen entering the church office after hours. The figure appeared to be tampering with the pastor's personal files, rifling through papers, and stealing documents. The police traced the figure's movements and discovered that it was not Alexis at all. The person in the video was a man, someone neither Daniel nor Alexis had ever mentioned in their dealings with the church. The discovery was a game-changer. Suddenly, the investigation shifted from a case of infidelity gone wrong to something much more sinister. There was someone else who had been quietly pulling strings, someone with an axe to grind against Daniel Hayes. Detective Martinez's team quickly traced the man's identity, Thomas Bennett, a former parishioner who had been disgraced and expelled from the church several years earlier. He had once been a promising member of the congregation, but a scandal involving financial mismanagement and personal misconduct had led to his removal. Bennett had always blamed Daniel for his fall from grace, and as the investigation revealed, he had been lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting for his chance to strike. Through witness statements and further investigation, it became clear that Bennett had been in constant contact with Alexis. The two had been in a secret alliance, sharing a mutual desire to bring Daniel down. For Alexis, it was about having the life she wanted with Daniel, no matter the cost. For Bennett, it was about revenge. And in a twisted turn of fate, their goals had aligned, setting in motion a chain of events that would culminate in murder. As the trial phase began, the legal maneuvering took an unexpected turn. Alexis's defense team, armed with the newfound evidence of Bennett's involvement, argued that she had not acted alone in the crime. They claimed that Alexis had been manipulated and coerced by Bennett, who had preyed on her emotional vulnerability. The defense painted a picture of a woman driven to the edge by an obsessive love and a vengeful accomplice who had used her as a pawn. But the prosecution wasn't so easily swayed. They argued that while Bennett's role was undeniable, Alexis was still the one who had pulled the trigger. She had made the decision to kill Daniel, and no one had forced her to do so. Her cold, calculated behavior in the aftermath of the crime, her lack of remorse, her eerie calm, suggested that the murder had been premeditated, that Alexis had known exactly what she was doing. The courtroom drama intensified as more witnesses took the stand. Claire, Daniel's wife, testified to the emotional toll the affair had taken on their marriage, detailing her husband's guilt and his failed attempts to break things off with Alexis. She spoke of the betrayal she had felt when she learned the truth, but she also conveyed a deep sense of loss. Daniel's death, she said, had left a hole that nothing could fill. In a shocking twist, Bennett himself was called to the stand. His defense team had insisted he was an innocent bystander, merely a friend of Alexis who had never intended for things to escalate to violence. But as he sat in the courtroom, sweating and shifting uncomfortably, his own words began to unravel the facade. Under cross-examination, Bennett admitted to manipulating Alexis, though he denied any direct involvement in the shooting. The jury, however, wasn't convinced. His testimony only deepened the mystery of his role in the crime and added another layer of intrigue to the case. In the end, the legal proceedings left the town of Willow Creek reeling. Alexis was convicted of murder, though the jury considered the influence of Bennett in her sentencing. While some believed she was a victim of circumstance, others felt she was a willing participant in a tragic, misguided plot. Bennett, too, faced charges, though his role in the murder would forever be a point of contention. As the trial came to a close, the community was left to piece together the truth. The once perfect image of Reverend Daniel Hayes had been shattered, revealing a life filled with secrets, lies, and betrayal. And the consequences of those secrets would haunt the people of Willow Creek for years to come. The trial of Alexis Green had captivated the entire town of Willow Creek. For months, the community had been torn between shock, disbelief, and the unsettling realization that their beloved pastor, Daniel Hayes, had been leading a double life. As the legal proceedings unfolded, the full extent of the affair and the tragic consequences of those hidden emotions were laid bare. Alexis's defense team painted a picture of a woman pushed to the brink. They argued that Alexis had been manipulated by Thomas Bennett, a disgruntled former parishioner with a vendetta against Daniel. They claimed that Alexis had been emotionally unstable and that Bennett had preyed on her vulnerabilities, using her to exact his revenge on Daniel. Her actions, they argued, were not those of a premeditated killer, but of someone who had been coerced into committing a crime in the heat of a toxic relationship. But the prosecution was firm in their stance. They acknowledged Bennett's role in the conspiracy but insisted that Alexis was not a helpless victim. She had been fully aware of what she was doing when she shot Daniel. Her calm demeanor after the crime, the way she had planned and executed the murder with such precision, pointed to premeditation. The prosecutor argued that Alexis had allowed her obsession with Daniel to overtake her rationality, and that no amount of emotional manipulation could justify her actions. The trial was a whirlwind of emotions and legal wrangling. Claire Hayes, Daniel's wife, was a steady presence in the courtroom, offering testimony that reflected the heartbreak she had endured upon learning of the affair. Her pain was palpable as she spoke of the man she had married, the man she had trusted, only to find out that he had betrayed her and the very community he was meant to serve. Yet, despite the deep hurt, she spoke of a desire for justice, not vengeance, for her husband's untimely death. In a stunning moment, Alexis took the stand in her own defense. Her testimony was filled with remorse, but there was something chilling in her tone. She admitted to the affair, acknowledged her actions, but denied having planned the murder. Her words seemed rehearsed, her emotions controlled. There were moments when she appeared to show genuine sadness, but they were fleeting, overshadowed by the cold calculation that had been revealed in the investigation. The trial reached its climax with the closing arguments. The jury was left to decide whether Alexis was a victim of circumstance or a cold-blooded murderer who had orchestrated the death of a man who had once been her confidant, lover, and leader. After days of deliberation, the verdict came down. Alexis Green was convicted of second-degree murder, though the jury considered the influence of Bennett in their sentencing, offering a degree of leniency. She was sentenced to 25 years to life, and while some in the community felt that justice had been served, others believed the sentence was too lenient. Thomas Bennett, who had been complicit in the crime, was also arrested and faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, with his sentencing still to be determined. The trial's conclusion did little to heal the wounds of Willow Creek. The community was left to grapple with the reality of the betrayal that had rocked their foundation. The church, once a symbol of unity and moral guidance, now stood as a stark reminder of the fragility of trust. Attendance at services dwindled, and many parishioners found themselves questioning the very tenets they had once held dear. How could they have failed to see the cracks in the foundation of their pastor's life? How could they have been so blind to the danger lurking beneath the surface? For those who had known Daniel best, the loss was a complicated one. While his death was tragic, there was also a sense of disillusionment that hung heavily in the air. The congregation had trusted him, had looked to him for answers and comfort. To learn of his affair and the violent end it had led to left them reeling, unsure of what to believe anymore. Alexis's conviction was a somber end to a story that had begun with hope and faith but ended in tragedy and destruction. Some members of the community believed she was a victim of her emotions, while others saw her as a perpetrator of unimaginable harm. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek began to heal, but the scars remained. The church reopened its doors, but it was not the same. The healing process was slow, marked by painful introspection and a deep sense of loss. People came to terms with the fact that even the most revered leaders could have secrets, and that love, betrayal, and obsession could lurk behind the smiles of those they trusted most. The tragedy also left a broader message for the town, and perhaps for everyone watching. In the midst of a life built on faith and good intentions, there can be dangerous hidden emotions, unresolved conflicts, and unchecked desires. The pastor's secret life, the affair, the violence, it all served as a reminder that the human heart is complex, unpredictable, and capable of both great love and devastating betrayal. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, the people of Willow Creek found themselves questioning not only the actions of the individuals involved, but also the very fabric of their own lives. How many secrets were hidden behind closed doors? How many lives had been unknowingly affected by the choices of those who appeared perfect? And most poignantly, how often do people ignore the signs of unresolved emotions until it's too late? The story of Reverend Daniel Hayes, Alexis Green, and the tragedy that unfolded would live on in the town's history, a cautionary tale of the dangers of hidden lives, unspoken truths, and the unpredictable consequences of human desires. And as the years passed, Willow Creek would never be quite the same again. The scars left by the pastor's betrayal and the violence that followed would linger, a reminder to all that sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones we tell ourselves. As we wrap up this harrowing tale, we want to hear from you. What do you think about the case of Reverend Daniel Hayes and Alexis Green? Was justice truly served with Alexis's conviction, or was the sentence too lenient? Could this tragedy have been prevented if the truth had come out earlier, or was it an unavoidable consequence of buried secrets and emotional turmoil? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to hear your perspective. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. Share this video with friends or family who are intrigued by true crime stories. It's a conversation starter, and you never know who might have a theory of their own. If you're interested in more chilling true crime stories, check out some of our other videos on the channel. From unsolved mysteries to tragic betrayals, we dive deep into the cases that leave you questioning everything. Stay tuned for more gripping content, and as always, thank you for watching.